Off. Hello and welcome to George Washington University. I'm Susan Aronson. I'm a professor here at the Institute of International Economic Policy, where we do research on economic policy, obviously, but in particular, one of our areas of research is digital trade and digital internet governance issues, including human rights issues. So I'm pleased to welcome you to this event, Towards a Trusted Internet. It is one of a series of seminars that we have organized thanks to funding from an anonymous donor and ICANN. The anonymous donor and ICANN make the refreshments possible, so we are very, very grateful to them for that. I'd also like to thank Eric Berger, Stephen Miller, and David Viorst, who I don't see, from the Internet Society of DC, who got the speakers for this panel, and we're really grateful to have them. You may want to get online and tweet about this event, so let me tell you how you can do that. So if you go to GW event, okay, and then go to ESI, and then you log in as ESIA, Elliott School of International Affairs Events. That's your login. And I will now very slowly tell you the password because, like many passwords, it's truly bizarre. But it's capital E, $, exclamation mark, so if that did not work for you, I'll be standing right here and you can ask me, or you can ask my colleague Kyle Renner, who's over here, who also helped organize this event. He raised his hand. Okay, so as you probably know if you read the news, it was not a great month for cybersecurity or trust in the internet. For example, Admiral Mike Rogers testified last week, and he said that several governments could totally disable U.S. websites as well as aviation. The NSA also, interestingly enough and weirdly enough, for the first time, actually had a question and answer session online where their privacy officer basically talked about what they're doing, and at least that's a start in trying to create a more trusted internet. The Chinese government suffered a major DNS attack. And Amnesty International and other groups created a new approach to trying to address malware that has been used to attack various human rights organizations, and they made it downloadable for free. So there's been a lot that's been happening that's positive and negative, but I don't know the path to this crypto nirvana promised land. So I hope our speakers will tell us that, whether it's an architectural solution or a policy solution. So we look forward to hearing from them, and we will leave plenty of time for your questions. So Eric, if you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Susan. So, yes, here we go. Much better. So first of all, I wanted to thank Susan's supporter, Steve. Thank you very much for supporting Susan so she could support us. Also wanted to thank the DC chapter of the Internet Society. How many people are here from or affiliated with this? Yeah, Sean, put your hand up. Yeah, a lot of people here. So ask anybody about how to get involved. If you like what you hear today, feel free to volunteer and get involved. Just a really quick thing up front. Who here thinks that the United States government or any government should have easy access to the communication of child pornographers? Yeah, okay. Kidnappers? Tax evaders? I report everything. I report everything. Terrorists? Okay, we're going to come back on this concept a little bit later. I see what I did. There we go. Perfect. So part of, we're talking today about backdoors, so, a reasonable question would be, what is a backdoor? This is NIST's definition, any undocumented way of getting into a system. Many backdoors and a lot of what you hear about are actually mistakes. They weren't there intentionally. People, stumbled upon them. Other backdoors are there on purpose. I can give you a personal example. I made one of the largest network equipment companies because we had a backdoor that we told our customers about. We said, hey, if your network goes down, we've got a way of getting in to see whether it's our stuff that's broken or your stuff that's broken. And people thought that was fantastic. Backdoors are put in for lawful intercept, to listen to some of those examples we gave earlier. Some are for intelligence gathering, and some are for nefarious purposes, to steal your credit cards and other credentials. Since we are talking about the crypto nirvana, your 2-minute overview of encryption. We've got symmetric encryption, which is we basically mathematically scramble clear text into we call crypt text, such that an attacker can't figure out what the clear text was. And we basically will come up with this mathematical transformation and then put in a key. So take the clear text and the key, out comes the scrambled information. Very efficient, this process, but we have this problem. And the problem is, how do I give you the key? In fact, you could almost offer, well, if I could give you the key, I could probably give you the information. We have asymmetric encryption as a way to kind of address that, where we have a public key and a private key based on a mathematical concept of one-way functions. And the canonical example is multiplication. If I take two primes, multiply, use them to multiply, if I know both primes, I can divide and come up with, what the answer is. But if you don't know what those two numbers are, you have to do factoring. Multiplication, pretty easy in math terms, order n squared kind of operation. Factoring, very, very hard. Takes a lot longer to do that. Now, even with that kind of model, you can imagine if you do poor choices of your keys, people can kind of easily figure out, like if you pick your key as 2 and 3, it wouldn't take an attacker, you wouldn't need a supercomputer to figure out that that's not quite right. The other bit is this computation, even if you have the keys, kind of expensive. So what we typically do is we'll use this sort of cryptography to exchange what the key will be, and then use that key in the symmetric cryptography model. I have totally bollocks this, but we're doing good. Okay, privacy, security, and national security. IEEE USA, which is the U.S., kind of like ISOC DC is the DC chapter of the Internet site. You can kind of think of IEEE USA as the American bit, or representing American members of the IEEE. We wrote a paper or a position statement on encryption policy. This was back in 2011, where our concern was not so much focused on backdoors, but in those days we were talking, and Lance is going to talk a lot more about this, about weakening commercial encryption. And we had offered that would be a really bad idea, because encryption is essential for basically trust in the internet. The government needs it, financial services, your transactions. If you don't trust your bank online, you're not going to use online banking. Banks are not going to transfer money. Medical industry, we're not going to be sharing electronic health records. We're not going to call our doctor. And industry clearly needs to use it. We just recently published a white paper called Risking It All, which goes into a lot more of the details, both of what can go wrong, but also we weren't saying don't ever do it. What we were saying was you should measure the risks and make sure that the rewards are commensurate with the risk. Lance, again, is also going to touch upon this a little. One of the bottom lines, though, is if you put a backdoor in something, you can't count on it being a secret forever. Either the secret gets leaked or someone else just finds the back door. So we tend to kind of frown on putting in back doors. With all of this, discussion about crypto and backdoors and all that, there are other ways of getting at people's information. This is an XKCD. I see everyone squinting. Basically, it's talking about all these different ways of cracking encryption. But in this case, the drug him and hit him with a $5 wrench until he tells you the password is a very effective measure. We call it the rubber hose technique of breaking encryption. So today's panel, and in order of people who are going to be here, Lance Hoffman, who's a professor here at GW, Russ Housley, chair of the IAB, Quentin Liu, who's VP of Engineering at Symantec, and Chris Sahogan? I'll let you say it. All right, Sahogan. From ACLU. Bios are in here, so I'm not going to read them. We did have some people from the FBI and the intelligence community were going to come and it's really at the last minute they couldn't, and it was too late to get someone else. So I will probably spend a lot of time talking about sort of the other side. Here's a little bit of food for thought. Those pictures I had, demonstrating symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption, came from a website that's in Persian, in Farsi, hosted in Germany. Was that a site to help people do their e-commerce sites well? Was that a site for Al-Qaeda to learn how to encrypt their communications? Either way, the fact that I went to that site will probably make me a person of interest, but kind of food for thought, because I like to attribute where I get those cool cartoons from. So on to the panel. I'm going to ask Kyle. Kyle, are you here? Can you bring me back? Because what happened here is I put it in a different mode, and it's bad. So while he's doing that, this is as much for the audience as it is for the speakers. Yeah, you should notice I'm not in presentation mode here. Might be easier just to quit and start again. We're going to have each of the panelists talk for 8 minutes, and it's a literal 8 minutes. You heard the beeping go off up here, so I'm going to stay up here. It's really 8 minutes. Fairness to the panelists, if you have a question, hold it, because what we're going to do is we're going to have all the panelists speak, and then everyone's going to come up, and then we're going to have a discussion. The whole point, I personally, if I go to something like this, I want to be able to say, hey, what about? Or, hey, have you thought of? Or, have a real discussion. So that's why we're limiting the panelist part, so it's not a lecture. It's really a more interactive experience. Lance, I'm not taking from your time right now. I'm going to start when we start because I screwed up. So and Kyle, actually, while we're doing thanks, this gentleman here is the person who's made sure that all the food and beverages and space and all that really happened. So, and the AV, thank you. Perfect.
You can protect the internet, but you just can't use PowerPoint.
That's right. No Microsoft jokes. So thank you, Lance. Yep. Okay. Do you want me to hold your book and I can hand it to you?
That's a prop.
Yeah, that's right. And you want your slides? Or?
No, I got that. That's okay. Thanks. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Eric, and thanks, everybody, for coming out. Okay. Now, if I can make this work, let's see. Okay, good. All right, well, I want to talk about this. This what we're doing today. I woke up, and said, have I been transported back 20 years? Because really, we've been through a lot of this years ago. Today feels like 1994 and 1995. Many of the same issues, many of the same solutions are being proposed. The tensions between competing interests are similar, and I'm afraid that sometimes well-known and sometimes respected organizations don't do their homework before leaping in and making mistakes that we knew about 20 years ago. There's a long documented trail of information on crypto policy. I've just cited 4 things here just to give visual examples. Classic in this field book, The Code Breakers, and it's had several editions, and that's, I think, the most recent one there by David Kahn, is a fascinating history of making and breaking codes way back to the ancient Hebrews through Julius Caesar, onto World War II, and onto almost the current day. Thank you, Eric, for the prop. I went to my bookshelf. This is a book I edited 20 years ago called Building in Big Brother, okay? The cryptographic policy debate. I'll show you its table of contents in a minute, but you'll see the same book. I ought to go back and have another version of it. Crypto is a wonderful story by Stephen Levy of some of the players in the game. From mainly the, I'd say, 70s on, with the advent of public key cryptography. And then find that there are we're not in America the only people who look at this stuff. There's a thesis called The Crypto Controversy by a guy named Coops, who I think is in the Netherlands, and has a compendium, lots and lots of stuff. And there's other things written too. These are just some examples. If you go back to that book I just held up, these are my section headings. There's about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 articles in each section, and I won't read them to you. You can see them for yourself. But these are the headings, and if you look at these, a lot of these could be written today, could be used today, and just change or update the material in some cases. Now, in 1995, there was very little discussion of the Internet of Things or big data analytics or cyber warfare, though there was some. And in fact, in terms of big data analytics, I remember being here. I'm older than maybe anybody in the room, and I remember being in Washington as a callow youth at the Brookings Institution in 1968 or something like that. I was a graduate student, and people were talking about analytics then. They weren't calling it big data, but it was the same thing, and who's going to do what with it, and that. So a lot of this is old stuff, okay? We then, of course, we hadn't suffered through the 9/11 attacks. We didn't have Edward Snowden revealing secrets. So some things are different as well. Real question is, are the benefits worth the costs of what? I wrote a letter to the editor in response to the Washington Post editorial of October 4th. It was entitled Smartphone Secrets, and the Post's editorial position is that Apple and Google's new approach to encryption is too extreme. Perhaps Apple and Google could invent the kind of secure golden key they'd retain and use only when a court has approved a search warrant. This sounded eerily familiar, like I had been there before, okay? Of course, it begs the question of whom do you trust? And if you don't trust either the phone manufacturer or the police, then what do you do? And my entire letter is right here. Technological methods exist that require, for example, a majority of trusted parties to agree, K out of N, before you make a key available. And these parties could include lots of stakeholders. They can include the police, they can include the phone manufacturer, they could include a civil liberties organization, they could include a news organization, others, you name it. How many people, how many parties, how many stakeholders should be involved, and who they should be? These are difficult questions. And even a more challenging one is whether the gain is worth the financial costs and the social costs of implementing such a solution. Nothing is free. It has all sorts of costs involved with whatever you do. And in the report that Eric just mentioned, I would say the first rule, one of the first rules, if not the first rule of cybersecurity is, don't run off and put in the next whiz-bang thing. First, do a risk analysis. First, you do a risk analysis before you cross the street. Do it when you're doing cybersecurity. There, I quote from that article, the paper he described. In there it says, among other recommendations, no entity should act to reduce the security of a product or service sold in a commercial market without first conducting a careful and methodical risk assessment. And down below, I say, we need open research on technological methods that allow us to do this, allow us to maintain a free society. But to do this, we're going to have to look at economic, political, and social costs and benefits. And there is lots of research, not lots, there's not enough, but there is relatively much more research on technological controls than there are on the other controls, which are just important. Because anybody who's worked in security for a while knows it's a combination of technological and administrative and legal things you put all together. And oh, by the way, they vary from place to place in different countries and around the world. So in a bit of huckstering here, I'm going to say that we have a report on our website at CSPRI, and the URL is down at the bottom. If you want, Jonathan Berliner was a student here in the Elliott School last semester. He just graduated, and he did a paper on basically costs and benefits of surveillance, okay? It's not perfect, but it's a start, and it comes with a spreadsheet, which is also on the website, which you can download and play with, an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm the first to say garbage in, garbage out in terms of putting in the values and everything in the spreadsheet. That said, if you want to frame the discussion and look at things, you can put in things. The interesting thing about this spreadsheet and about this paper, it considers point of view not only of just one stakeholder, but of many stakeholders. In essence, uses a 3D matrix to put them all together. So you can say, basically, this stakeholder, the ACLU feels one way, EFF feels one way, the FBI feels this way, NSA feels this way, the New York Times feels this way. Put them all together, see what are the commonalities and what are the differences. At least gives you a starting point. I urge you, if you want to play with this, look at it. If you think it's useful, use it. Or contact me if you want to play more with it. Really boils down to what do you trust and whom do you trust? And here we're looking at not only crypto, but also general systems and people. Just last week, you'll see on the right-hand side there about the Reagan spy code lurking on computer networks. How did that come about? How did it get in where technologically, administratively? Crypto, we have standards bodies, we have other firms, thank you, perfect. Other people, things going over the net. In terms of general systems, we can work on different kinds of architecture, so it's not the classic von Neumann architecture that people are using all the time, which is the source of a lot of our problems. And then the people, programmers and just plain old users, what they will and won't do, what they can do. I'll end up with one more plug and stop. In March, and I don't know the exact date, but if you go to CSPRI's website or go to URL and back up and look at the Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute, GW, just type in GW University Seminars for this year in March. I forget the exact date. There's going to be a lunchtime seminar on surveillance. The same sort of thing, but different, because it's going to be, the way it looks like it's shaping up, it's going to be a debate in the form of the Intelligence Squared debates, if you're familiar with those. And it's also going to be not the classic should they or shouldn't they, but rather, where do you do it? Collection or use? Where should you stop it? So that could be very interesting. To be continued. Thank you, Eric.
Perfect. Thank you, Lance, for being exactly on time. Russ?
Good afternoon. I'm Russ Housley. I'm the founder of Vigil Security, and I'm currently serving as the chair of the Internet Architecture Board. So I want to start by saying who is the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. The group just had its 92nd meeting, but the t-shirts that we often have with these meetings, if you go back to the one for the 50th meeting, it says, "We make the net work." And that pretty much sums up what the IETF tries to do. We do that by producing documents, mostly protocol specifications, that people then implement into their products or open source. And we also do informational and experimental and best current practice kinds of documents. So the IETF is all about open standards. And so while the IETF mission is to make the network work better, no one is in charge of the internet. Instead, many people collaborate to make the internet work. Each person brings a unique perspective to that discussion, And that diversity sometimes makes it very difficult to reach consensus. But when consensus is achieved, the result, the outcome is better, clearer, and more strongly supported than any of the initial positions. And that really is the strength of the IETF. The IETF's open to everyone who has a desire to participate. And even if you're unable to make face-to-face meetings, the IETF has mail lists that you can join and make sure your perspectives are understood. That said, we are not trying to make as many standards as possible. Rather, we're interested in one internet. That is, we want global standards that maximize interoperability. We're seeing lots of standards right now that are adding capabilities for mobile devices, but we're interested in avoiding protocols that are specialized for one particular location in the internet. We're also a very technically focused group, and the most strong form of argument in convincing others is code that demonstrates your point. So we say we achieve rough consensus and running code. So I want to show a brief movie because it can say more about the IETF in 90 seconds than a whole bunch of slides. He's going to do it from the back.
Are you going to do it from the back? I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Or you're going to do it? I'm going to do it.
All right.
I'm doing it. If I find this slide, there we go. Okay, and who knows the keyboard shortcut to play? Oh, the mouse is up top?
Sure it is.
Move it down to the right.
Down to, oh, there it is! Yay! All right, I'll add some time to your.
The internet is like a global city. We build it and use it together. But a vibrant city needs well-engineered infrastructure to keep it growing and running. The internet is like a global city. We build it and use it together. But a vibrant city needs well-engineered infrastructure to keep it growing and running smoothly.
That's why we need the Internet Engineering Task Force, a global organization of volunteers collaborating to design standards that provide the infrastructure for innovation on the Internet.
The IETF is open. Open participation, open processes, and open standards. Today, because of the IETF, we can do so many things that we take for granted. Emailing colleagues, instant messaging friends, and making phone calls to family, all over the internet.
Email and internet addresses can use many different languages.
And we can be more confident in the information we access over the internet. Tomorrow, because of the IETF, billions more people will have an address on the internet, joining the 2 billion of us already connected. And that means more people communicating and collaborating on new ideas. New ideas like an Internet of Things, connecting devices in your home and beyond. Over a smart grid that links everything from your thermostat to medical devices. Imagine all of the things the internet will connect. Your car, your appliances, and your mobile devices. The IETF is open to you and your ideas. Support the internet. Support the Internet Engineering Task Force.
This RFC 1984, which was not chosen by accident in terms of the number, basically says we're only going to do standards that use strong cryptography. And we recently had a publication regarding pervasive surveillance in RFC 7258. The second paragraph talks about new protocols and saying the default should basically be that things are encrypted, and that should be the design goal. We acknowledge that there are certain situations where encryption will not be possible, but let's strive for that. We recommend that encryption be deployed throughout the protocol stack, not in a single place, because you can't protect against all different kinds of information being leaked from one place in the protocol stack. There's kind of a call to action that basically encourages designers to include confidentiality as part of their operation and make that the default, encourages implementers to include encryption in their products and implementations, and again, turn it on by default. And we encourage service operators to deploy those capabilities, and we encourage firewall vendors to change their policy so that encryption can pass through. Basically, the last statement, last paragraph of the statement is the whole point of this is to restore trust. That is, we want security and privacy both to be important aspects of your internet experience. Then, the following week, there was an announcement called Let's Encrypt. This is about a free certificate authority. It's a joint effort between EFF, Mozilla, Cisco, Akamai, Dentrust, and University of Michigan. And basically they're saying, we want to remove the obstacles to deploying encryption on websites, and they're going to make this free service available to allow that to happen. The IETF already has a bunch of standards that were developed to provide security, and most of these deal with data in transit, but a few also deal with data at rest. And here's a list of a few of them: IPsec, TLS, DTLS, OpenBGP, and SMIME. Many applications already make use of these, and there's examples for network storage, web, voice over IP, and email that make use of them. So these are the things that are available today to be turned on, in addition to developments that come in the future. So from my perspective, this means that we should expect improved capabilities in future developments. We've already seeing initiatives to make it easier to deploy these products that have encryption. And if this EFF initiative is successful, we'll even see the cost of doing so going down. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Quentin?
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. First off, a thank you to Eric and the Internet Society DC chapter for giving me the opportunity to participate today, and another thank you for George Washington University for hosting. I am going to start off with a little bit of a historical perspective. In the mid-1990s, we became the world's first certification authority. And back then, what we had as a vision is being able to empower the growth and the innovation in the internet by providing some foundational crypto and security basically geared for e-commerce. Now, back then, as you guys remember, in the mid-1990s, companies like eBay and Amazon were just starting out. But if you fast forward onto today, I think the success, the growth of e-commerce, and more importantly, the trajectory of e-commerce has exceeded well beyond our wildest hopes and dreams back in the mid-1990s. And even back then, one tenet we held back then, and we still do nowadays, is that technology should be used as a tool to enable innovation and enable growth for economies globally. And if I take a look at that premise and bring it back to what we're talking about today, one of the things to remember is that, and I'll state the obvious, growing economies stand a lot to gain by having a trusted and secure internet. Anything that deviates and erodes that trust from the internet is going to have a degrading effect on the potential that global e-commerce and economies can have. So that's something perspective-wise I wanted to share with everybody of the unique perspective that I think we have had over the last couple of decades. But when we talk about positions like that, we also are very mindful that the same technologies that we use to secure and make private all of our transactions across the internet, those are the exact same technologies that bad actors use. And I feel like that's why today's discussion is, I'm really looking forward to the exchanges and the ideas coming out of it, but I feel that from a personal perspective, there's a strong case to be made that technology should not be willingly degraded by putting in backdoors as applies to economy growth. We talked a little bit about certification authority, and I'm not going to have enough time to go through all the details of what a CA does, but as a very high-level goal, the CAs in the world are designed to solve a very fundamental problem in the sense that we want to establish a secure private channel between point A and point B. And point A very well may be my browser at home, whether I use IE, Chrome, or any other browser, and point B may be Amazon.com. And the way that the ecosystem works is a combination, an amalgam of the underlying cryptography, the CAs themselves, which provide the digital certificates and the trusted hierarchy, and with a combination of those three elements, these are the elements that actually produce that secure and trusted and private connection. Now, the one thing that I don't know that most people are aware of, a cert is not a cert is not a cert. All certs are created equal. For any given CA that you see out there in the world today, there's actually 3 different variants of certificates that are floating out there out in the world. And all of them have different degrees of identity assurances associated with them. The 3 types of certificates are DV certificates, OV certificates, and EV certificates. So an OV certificate is what we call, let me start at the bottom rung with DV certificates. A domain validated certificate is a cert by which a CA has only guaranteed the identity of somebody who owns a domain name. So if Eric actually has legitimate rights to have the domain name PayPal, not PayPal, paypal.com, Eric can get a DV cert for paypal.com. So the identity assurance for DV certs, again, is only for the domain ownership. The next step up, which is the OV certificates, and the OV certificates are what's prevalent in internet today for e-commerce and other high-value transactions. OV certificates stand for organization validation. And what that means is, in addition to proving ownership of the actual domain, what CAs will do is now vet and prove that the applicant actually is a organization that's publicly accessible and vetted, and that organization has rights and privilege to use the domain for that certificate. So again, OV certs are what's most prevalent out there in the world for the high-value transactions. Now, there's a third class of certificates which are called EV certificates, and these are known as extended validation certificates. Now, a visual difference between EV versus OV and DV is that when you use your browser, if you're hitting a website that's actually using an EV certificate, one of the things that you'll notice is that your address bar within your browser is going to turn green. Now, to a consumer, this is a very powerful step in adding visual cues that add on top of the security that the internet is offering when SSL is used properly. So a great point, a great case, it would be for man-in-the-middle attacks today. For the semi-sophisticated man-in-the-middle attacks, which do involve SSL certificates that are illegitimate, for the unsuspecting consumer, you'll still have that lock icon in your browser. But with EV certificates, what you'll have is, from the consumer's perspective, if they're seeing an absence of green bar, that's a very strong visual indicator that something is not right. So again, the 3 different types of certificates are really a way of saying all certs are not created equal. Okay? The CAs in the world today that actually have their roots embedded in the major browsers are all part of what's known as a CA browser forum, the CAB forum as we call it. And this is a consortium of CAs and browser vendors and other interested parties whose goal is to set policy in terms of, among other things, minimum baseline requirements that CAs should and must follow. And all these requirements are audited annually by people like KPMG and European equivalents. And I'm going to race along a little bit further now. So what I've outlined so far are the roles of a CA, but the responsibilities of the CA go much farther than that. So given just semantics perspective, if you take a look at the customer base that we have an obligation to go way above and beyond baseline requirements. So what we really take to heart is really building out and making sure we have fundamental security in our infrastructure, our people, our coding practices, and using all the technology that we can to ensure that we have a strong, secure, and private internet. I'm not going to go through the details of the technologies now, but I will be here right after this event in case people want to understand a little bit further the type of technologies we're bringing to bear. The key point of this slide is the following. Trust no longer equals just encryption on the internet. Trust has evolved in the sense that there's a lot of other factors at play where we're talking not only about security as an indicator of trust. And finally, looking forward from the CA perspective, we have a lot of things that can either be opportunities to expanding trust on the internet and a lot of detractors. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have enough time to go through it here, but I'd be happy to go through it after the session today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Art.
Thank you, Chris.
So I don't have any slides, but before I get started, since we just had that great remark on the importance of certificate authorities and HTTPS, I looked at the websites of all of my co-panelists before I got on stage, and I noticed that no one else's organization is using HTTPS by default, including Symantec, which sells certificates. I noticed you just said that the Symantec is taking all the best practices and using all the right security technologies. This seems like the one technology that you guys are selling you should be using, and I'm not picking you out of a crowd. I've been trying to encourage organizations to use HTTPS by default, and so for those of you in the audience who are in some kind of influential role in your own organization, whether you are a technologist or a lawyer or a policy person, please harass your coworkers and make sure that your own website is using HTTPS by default. If we cannot get people in a room like this to use HTTPS and to use encryption by default, we have no hope. And so the purpose, I think, of bringing us together and the reason that we're even having this event now isn't because of the availability of some new technology. It's because of the default use of these technologies. Encryption technologies have been around for decades. They've been built into widely available software, but they haven't been turned on by default. And so I only have a few minutes, but since no one else went really into the weeds on what's been happening and what has led to the FBI and the Attorney General sort of flipping out, I felt like it'd be useful to focus there briefly. So Apple and Google have both sort of made modifications to their smartphone operating systems. In Google's case, new Android phones are using disk encryption by default, full disk encryption. It has always been, this has been available for like the last 3 or 4 years since Android 4.0, but wasn't turned on by default. In Apple's case, they've had disk encryption for certain kinds of user data for the last few years, and that included email and any third-party app data. And what Apple has done is shifted more data into that highly protected bucket, a bucket where Apple doesn't have keys to decrypt the data. And I think it's useful to focus on what has changed and why. So companies like Apple and Google, which make mass market consumer products, they cannot roll out encryption with keys that they don't have to products that regular people use, unless there is a backup of the data. And the reason for that is that regular people forget their passwords. People forget their passwords all the time, and regular people expect to maintain access to their data even when they forget their passwords. Right? This is a basic rule of IT. The majority telephone calls to IT tech support desk are people who forget their passwords. And so a company like Apple, even if the security team and the legal team desperately want to turn on full disk encryption by default with keys that Apple doesn't have, that is not going to work for a multi-billion-dollar company who sell products to regular people at Best Buy and Staples and Walmart, because those kinds of customers don't want to lose their data when they eventually do forget their passwords. And so what has enabled full disk encryption by default isn't some amazing advance in encryption technology. It's actually the move to cloud backups by default. I think many of us think of the cloud as a fundamentally insecure and privacy problematic technology, and it's certainly the case that there are serious privacy issues associated with many implementations of cloud backups. But the reason that Apple can roll out disk encryption by default is because they're also using iCloud by default, right? So what's the worst case scenario for an iPhone customer? They forget their password on their device. They press, they try and get in a few times, they get locked out. They go to the store, they show their driver's license, they prove who they are. Apple resets their password. They do a factory wipe of a wipe of the device, a factory reset. They log in, and suddenly all of their data is pulled in off of the cloud. That is why Apple can roll out disk encryption by default. That's why Google can roll out disk encryption by default, because most of the data is still going to be there in the cloud. And so the total freakout by the FBI and by the AG, I feel like it's a little bit disingenuous, because most of the data that they want on those devices is still available from cloud computing companies in a form that those companies have access to. And the reason we know they have access to it is because the fact that they can reset your password and provide you with the data means they can see your data. Really what I think the debate should be focusing on is the move towards encryption for real-time communication services. And what I mean by this is not email, but ephemeral communication services like instant messaging, like voice, and like video communications. So you as a regular consumer have an expectation that you can go and look at your old photographs when they're backed up. You have an expectation that you can go and read your old emails. You do not have an expectation that you can go and listen to your old telephone calls, or that you can go and watch your old video chats with your loved ones, or in many cases that you can look at your old text messages. And it's for that reason that companies like Apple, like WhatsApp, and open source projects like Whisper Systems have been able to roll out end-to-end encrypted real-time communications with keys that those organizations do not have. We are moving to a world where there really is secure, wiretap-resistant instant messaging, video, and voice services. And the reason that mainstream companies and easy-to-use apps can do that is because people don't have to deal with the backup problem. If you forget your iMessage account information, that's fine. You wipe the keys, you create new ones, you get started again. That's why these companies can do this. And I think that the FBI and DOJ and their friends in the intelligence community, they're not actually that upset about disk encryption on the iPhone. What they're upset about is FaceTime and iMessage. And they don't really want to broadcast to the whole world which part of the Apple product line they're upset about. And so instead they focus on one thing that is getting them press, that allows them to get members of Congress to write letters, that allows them to get op-eds in the newspaper, that creates events like this, but without telegraphing to the bad guys, if you just use this particular technology, we won't be able to monitor what you're doing. Okay, so we are moving to a world where law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies are going to have to encounter default use of encryption for real-time communications apps. And so what that means then is we have to have an honest conversation about how those agencies are going to respond. And realistically, what that means is malware. What that means is that the FBI's Remote Operations Unit, which is based out of Quantico, they are a full-time unit that just hacks into people's computers. The NSA's Tailored Access Operations Unit, TAO, which is more than 1,000 people delivering malware and developing malware. we're going to see more technologies from units like that, and we're going to see units like those at other law enforcement agencies. We're going to see local and state agencies probably buying off-the-shelf technology because they don't have the resources or the expertise to develop those kinds of tools. And we're either going to see law enforcement agencies hacking into the computers and mobile devices of targets in order to steal or access data before it's encrypted, or we're going to see, and this is the thing that terrifies us at the ACLU, we're going to see the government going to trusted third-party companies and forcing them to deliver malware to their customers under the guise of security updates. This is truly the most terrifying thing that is on the horizon for us. And so I think, to conclude, we should, one, be having a realistic debate about what kind of encryption is going to be making problems for law enforcement, and that is real-time encrypted communications. And then we should also be having a realistic conversation about what are the likely responses from law enforcement. And those are not going to be legislation, but it's going to be a lot more hacking by various agencies. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Chris, if you could stay on up here, and if I could invite the rest of the panel to come on back. Actually, it just dawned on me, not planning ahead. Paul, do we have a microphone for our audience? Kyle's got one, good, because we are live streaming this and also archiving this discussion today. So if you can come up to the mic with your question, if you have a question, and Susan will break the ice for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hog this, but Chris's last comment really...
I had a, you know, if you didn't stand up, I was going to say, Susan, do you have anything you want to ask?
Chris, can I just ask you to expand on your last comment, because I'm with a little bit of criticism. I see organizations trying to come up with sanctions to deal with malware, the trade in malware, but I don't really see any NGO groups trying to create incentives to governments to stop using malware, or I don't see other strategies that to develop norms on the use of malware. And I'm deeply concerned about this just because I think you know I had this project that no one would fund, which was on government use of malware. I look forward to your answer.
So the debate that's taken place in the context of sort of norms and export controls has really been about making sure that malware and lawful hacking tools, so-called lawful hacking tools, don't end up in the hands of wrong governments. And so really what that means is, you know, can private companies like Hacking Team and Gamma, can they sell their products to the Vietnamese government or the Ethiopian government or the Thai government? There are no proposals on the table to prevent Raytheon from making bespoke malware for the FBI. And the reason there's no proposal on the table because they're not realistic. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia, and when I get on the subway in the morning and the subway goes through, you know, Pentagon Station, there are ads on the subway for bombers. In the same, you know, in this kind of town where we have defense contractors openly advertising traditional weapons, why would we expect the same defense contractors to somehow be prohibited from providing cyber weapons to either the military or the equivalent technology to law enforcement agencies? And so, you know, proposals to regulate that or limit or encourage or disincentivize its use, you know, I don't think those have really any chance of going anywhere right now. And so what instead we're trying to do is at least to inform the debate. And so one of the problems we have is that the FBI, which is the most active federal agency, law enforcement agency in this area, they're not exactly interested in talking about what they're doing. And so we've worked really hard over the last 2 years to expose the existence of these capabilities and then to try and help people understand what's taking place, because, you know, to be clear, DOJ never went to Congress and asked for explicit legislation permitting them to use malware. And the handful of court orders that we've seen authorizing the delivery of malware never really make it clear what the software does. They ask judges for permission to, you know, install code into a website that causes visiting computers to identify their location. Well, that doesn't include the word hack. It doesn't include exploit security flaws. It doesn't include the word payload. I mean, any terms of art that even a technically informed person would see and say, aha, they're using malware, those are absent from the warrant applications. And so we feel like right now the most important thing that we can do is just to get a debate going here in Washington and in state capitals around the country so that the public understands that the capabilities of law enforcement don't stop at calling up AT&T and asking them to do a wiretap, that they're actually getting into some fairly sophisticated areas. And as I hinted at before, one of the big questions we don't have an answer to is the many ways in which they can get the malware onto the computers of targets. It's one thing if they phish a target by sending them an email, but we think that it's really problematic when law enforcement agencies either force companies to aid the delivery of malware to their customers, or as we learned about a month ago through actually my reviewing of some FOIA documents, that the FBI was impersonating a legitimate news organization, the Associated Press, in their efforts to deliver malware to a target. You are more likely to click on an email from PayPal than you are from the FBI. So if the FBI wants to get you to install their software, they're probably going to be impersonating some innocent third party to get that software onto your computer. And we think that that raises a host of really serious public policy issues.
Lance, you have some thoughts on that?
Well, the only thoughts I have, I want to reiterate, I feel like I've been transported back 20 years. I feel like I've been transported back 20 years again, especially in this business of putting malware on machines, or who builds what and who uses it. That's really the question. I was asked, I dragged along also in preparation for this, I identified some congressional testimony I gave in 1999. No, I'm sorry, this was in 1999, yes. And at that time, I got a call. I had a consulting client at the time, and they were due to testify before Congress in 3 weeks, and they had been making the case that they wanted to have more freedom to export because everybody else, you could already export things, okay? And Congress didn't really buy this. And they said, we've been saying this, but we don't have any proof. So I found a couple of graduate students, and I had them work from like midnight to 6 in the morning because they could make calls to Europe and places like that. And they said exactly what they were doing. They said, we want to buy software from you that does encryption. And a lot of people said, oh, we'll just give it to you. We're with you in this fight. We'll just give it to you. We said, no, we want to buy it. We want to show that you can buy it perfectly legally, bring it in, and then wheel it out before Congress, which is exactly what we did. And at the time, there were 805 hardware or software products incorporating cryptography manufactured in 35 countries outside the United States. Okay, so now how many countries have things? You have to solve the problem. You need general norms, and this is what I think Chris is getting at in a sense. We don't have yet norms on how things are going to be used and how they're not going to be used. Indeed, I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago, sponsored by the Elliott School, where some of the people from Cyber Command were there, and they're still struggling with it also. We don't have general norms about what are the rules of engagement and so forth.
I wanted to respond to another thing that Chris said. He said, gee, why aren't all of your organizations using HTTPS by default? And right before the IAB issued their statement, we said, maybe we should eat our own dog food and turn on encryption on the IAB website as the only way you can get to it. We decided not to do that. And this is part of the tussle and part of why the statement is in there that says for the administrators of firewalls to take a look at their policies. What we were afraid was that if we did that, the people behind these firewalls that discard ciphertext would never see our statement. And the whole point is to speak to everyone. So that was the reason we chose not to do that.
I want to also add in on the original conversation related to malware. So from my perspective, I think malware in general is a very fascinating area that I think absolutely we should be focusing on. But by the very definition of malware and sort of where it's hitting, it is very much a targeted attack, whether you're talking about spear phishing or any combination of those, where you have advanced persistent threats, where it's a whole new ball game. But I don't think we should lose focus also on just the fundamental mass sort of vulnerability potential backdoors that there are with just overall technology in general. So again, not that we shouldn't talk about malware, but fundamentally, we need to just basically button up fundamental technology in general. I think both of those have a very strong place in our minds. And I also did want to respond to Chris's earlier comments about deploying HTTPS by default. This is, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to go over this in my last slide, but one of the things that we are very fearful of as we talk about trust on the internet moving forward is not giving the community a false sense of security. And what I mean by that is several different things, whether or not everybody loads up their websites with DB certs, which, arguably that's not the best thing for trust on the internet. But what we don't want to do is have everybody go out and race to deploy SSL on day one, because we've heard it from our customers, right? There's legitimate reasons why we don't see mass deployment today everywhere. Some of it has to do with cost. Some of it has to do with a misinformed or misguided fear of performance impacts. But in general, what we guide our customers and ourselves, what we do is basically be thoughtful and mindful of protecting what's valuable data first, and then work your way self out. So definitely we do absolutely have programs to deploy HTTPS full and wholesale, but to us it's a secondary conversation where we're just trying to protect marketing literature. So I think those type of things, wrapping it up into sort of one of the things that we're mindful of is not creating a false sense of security and helping people to focus on what's really important.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that argument works in 1995 or 2002, but in 2014, encryption needs to be the default. Encryption is used now on every new website built by GSA, every federal agency website, regardless of whether it's collecting any sensitive information. It is the default for the websites the GSA builds. The chief technology officer of the New York Times challenged all the other CTOs of newspapers just last month to move to encryption by default by the end of 2015. For the people in this room who care about technology enough to come to an event like this, if we want law enforcement to not be able to successfully demonize encryption in the eyes of the courts, then we need to start using it. And we need to start using it for really boring things, right? Encryption cannot just be about the emails that you send to, the one tech-savvy security paranoid friend you have. It needs to be for everything. Every instant message you send needs to be encrypted. Every nonprofit organization in the city needs to be using it. Every law firm needs to be using it. Every think tank needs to be using it. The Senate and House websites need to be using it. The White House website needs to be using it. The IRS needs to be using it. And security companies who get major headlines when they find flaws and are the first companies that are called when a breach is discovered, they need to be setting an example for others. And so this is not about just protecting sensitive information on your website, it's about leading by example. And the fact is, it's not that difficult to turn on HTTPS by default, and if expense is the thing that's holding you back. I know that your certificates are expensive, but GoDaddy sells them for $10 a year. Encryption should be the norm in 2015, which is where we're going. And the idea that someone could visit, the Planned Parenthood website or Alcoholics Anonymous website and be looking at information about, how do I contact this clinic, or, how do I get the number for a suicide hotline? That information needs to be safe and protected. And I think many of us think of encryption as something that just protects information that the user submits, credit card numbers and that kind of stuff. And in fact, it's more than that. It protects information about reader privacy. And so encryption also protects fundamental First Amendment activities, the right to read, right? If someone is looking over your shoulder when you're browsing the web, you may not visit certain sites and you may not seek out certain information. And so what that means is organizations that want people to feel safe and feel comfortable to look into the information they have on their websites need to be encrypting everything from day one.
So let's take a question from the floor. You need a microphone. Whoever gets to the microphone first. And actually, do we have people calling in online?
Not that I see.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'll just say hello. Lance Hoffman, who I haven't seen since the crypto wars there at NIST. I sat on a small one of those working groups with you. I'll just point out in Chris's defense. I'm sorry, my name's David Lesher. I live in the area. Someone we both know, John Gilmore, has been saying exactly what Chris has been saying since we were at NIST together that day. There's something to be said for it.
Yeah, I do feel like we're doing back now. We're making you feel young. There was another question, this gentleman here.
I feel young anyway.
That's right.
Hi, I'm Andrea Glorioso. I'm a counselor of the delegation of the European Union to the US. I want to underline that I'm making this question, I'm making comments on a personal basis. I'm anyway a bureaucrat, so I don't have opinions, but in any case. An observation, I think this is a very helpful event, and understand that there were logistical problems for not having law enforcement in this room. I must say, however, I've been having this discussion on cybersecurity and law enforcement for many, many years. Until and unless law enforcement is in the room, these discussions are not very useful, quite frankly, because we're just talking over one another, and we need to understand the perspective of the counterpart. The question is, and it might appear like a naive question or even a provocative question, but it's not. I wanted to ask Christopher Sogoyan, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your surname, that was right. You said at the end of your intervention that there is the one thing that terrorizes the ACLU is the possibility for, if I understood correctly, for law enforcement to compel companies to introduce forcefully what you call malware, and I think law enforcement will call it another way, but it doesn't matter, to introduce malware into the computers of certain users. Now my question is, if that is done in a targeted manner, so if you're targeting one specific user that you are suspecting is part of a crime or in cases involved in investigation, and again, this is neither a provocative nor a naive question, but why does that terrorize you? Isn't it better than simply mass penetration of malware into everybody's computers just to have access to one or two systems? Thank you.
So I think that's a really good question, and I hope I have a good answer for you. And the example that I used to explain this to you is what's happened in Pakistan, which is that in their efforts to find Osama bin Laden, the CIA set up a fake polio immunization program where they had a doctor go out into villages and collect DNA under the guise of an immunization program. And once that was revealed and the Secretary of Defense confirmed it on CNN, people in Pakistan and Afghanistan started killing aid workers. They started killing health workers and chasing health workers out of villages. And then now in Pakistan, they have one of the first polio outbreaks in decades. I mean, they have a genuine polio public health crisis. And we have a solution to the polio problem. We have a vaccine, but the problem is that the vaccine isn't getting to people because some people there think that foreign health workers are in fact spies in disguise. And I'm not going to say that their suspicions are right, because I think 99.99999% of health workers are health workers, but it's the potential that one of them is in fact the CIA agent that is giving weight to the suspicions of the people who want to chase these workers out. Once that episode came to light, you had the heads of several American schools of public health writing to the president and saying this is outrageous. The intelligence community should never impersonate public health workers because it fundamentally threatens the credibility of the public health community, and it's more important that people get immunized for the health of the whole world. I think with that argument there, I think the same thing can be said about security updates. We want people to get security updates and get them automatically. The world of Windows XP, where people had to go out and seek security updates, meant that we had a world where most people were running out-of-date vulnerable software. In a world where security updates come automatically from the vendor and are trustworthy and reliable, everyone else gets the updates and everyone is then protected. And so it's not just your computer that's protected, you're also protected from other people whose computers might be infected as part of botnets. The security and safety of the internet depends upon automatic updates. And so I don't think we want to give people any reason to turn off updates. I don't think we want governments either impersonating the update channel, which is what happened with Flame, where what we believe to be the US government impersonated the Microsoft Windows Update Service with an MD5 hash collision, or a government going to an Apple or Google of the world and saying, hey, you have the ability to push app updates down to your users. We would like to give you this one app for this one user and go and do it. You're right. This is targeted. It would only impact this one person. But the eventual disclosure, and of course it would eventually come out, would fundamentally undermine the trust in the security update system. And that, I think, is far too important for and outweighs whatever benefit would come from that unique surveillance operation.
Can I add one more thing to what Chris said? If you had that situation and it came out eventually that this malware was planted and it came to light, I think there would be those who would then rush in, take advantage of it. In essence, it's the question you started with. It's the back door. Oh, let me make it so it doesn't just attack one person. Let's make it so it attacks a whole class. But now that I've got the code here, let's make it so well hidden that it still looks like it's okay, but it isn't okay. Then you've got, in essence, another zero-day attack.
And what does it mean? I mean, the ACLU, our interest is not in protecting the profits of big companies. We focus on civil liberties. But if you do care about U.S. exports or European exports, the reputation of Silicon Valley technology companies depends upon trust with their users. And if users think that there's a chance that they're going to get malware pushed by Google, Google's reputation goes down the toilet. And the same thing could be said for any European cybersecurity company. You can only push update malware intentionally to your customers once before you lose that business.
What I would offer, though, and this is a very good kind of question, is it's a risk analysis. The question is are we talking about something that would destabilize the entire security update concept, or is it something that and particularly if it's not an Apple or a Google or a Microsoft, but Joe's Storm Door and software company, if they're compromised, would that mean that no one would ever get another software update again, or that Joe goes out of business when it's disclosed? That there's a sort of a risk reward thing, and it's and this is where I think Lance's work kind of highlights that well, if it's Google, probably the risks are too high. If it's Joe's software company, maybe Joe's willing to get paid off or stay in business or get that government contract in exchange for targeting that one person.
I mean, look at Hushmail. They're a great example. They're a Canadian company. They provided web-based encrypted email. The encryption was done there were two modes, but one of them was done via JavaScript. And so you would enter your password into the browser. The server would receive the password. It would temporarily use it to decrypt the mails, forget the password, and give you your decrypted mails. The DEA went to Hushmail with a court order and said, we want you to temporarily retain the password and then turn over all of two users' encrypted emails. Well, no one trusts Hushmail anymore, right? And so if you are a provider of cybersecurity services, whether it is antivirus, whether it's certificate authority, whatever software or service you're in, if the government comes to you, it's a death sentence in the form of a court order, because your customers will not trust you again. And so you have the Hushmail scenario where the company is killed by the US government, or you have the LavaBit scenario where the company basically said, well, we're going to shut down rather than do this. Either way, the company's toast. It's just a question of whether they want to, fall on the sword themselves or have their head cut off.
I noticed our two ISOC DC people being ultimate gentlemen, which means neither of them were coming forward, but Stephen, please.
So there's many questions I could ask,
Steve, tell
but
us who you are.
I'm with ISOC DC. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Your name is?
Steve Miller. So I have two questions. There's many, but I have two. The first is with regard to what Chris said earlier about the real-time communication being encrypted. I wondered whether CALIA would apply to that. I know that CALIA, the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, in which the law enforcement is obliged to provide communication to provide them an equivalent of a wiretap, not data at rest, not data locked in an iPhone, but real-time communications. So if that's the case, if you think that Apple and Google are worried, or the FBI is more worried about the real-time communication, the text messaging, first of all, that's not considered the same as CALEA? Like, the question is, would CALEA apply to that or not? And if not, could Congress update that to make it do? Second question is for Russ, but also for everybody. You mentioned there's a call by the IAB to encrypt all throughout the protocol stack, encryption on every layer. That's a recommendation, I guess. It's happened before. I know it's hard to prognosticate, but how long do you think it might take for the IEF to get through that and get to like a set of actionable standards? And then from there, how long would it take to adopt? And that's maybe a difficult question to answer, but maybe given past experience and your knowledge, what time frame are we talking about?
So many people think of CALEA as a surveillance enabling law, and for the most part, CALEA is all about forcing a certain class of company to have surveillance capabilities built into their network. But there's actually a really, really good part of CALEA. It's 47 USC 1002b3. It says a telecommunications carrier shall not be responsible for decrypting or ensuring the government's ability to decrypt any communication encrypted by a subscriber or customer unless the encryption was, 1, provided by the carrier, and 2, the carrier possesses the information necessary to decrypt the communication. Pretty good provision, right? So what it says there is end-to-end encryption with a key not known to the provider is totally fine under CALEA. And if you look at the legislative history, it actually has even better language saying not only does this section of CALEA not take away your right to use encryption, it actually protects your right to use and ship encryption. And so it's certainly the case that if a provider has the means to decrypt communications, under CALEA they are required to provide access. Again, with the sort of footnote that not all companies are subject to CALEA, so you really have to have some kind of nexus to a telecommunications network or a phone network to be CALEA compliant. But even then, as long as you don't have the key, you're in good shape. And so I think that's why we're seeing companies like Apple rolling out encryption that's end-to-end with the keys that they don't have, because the law protects them.
And the standards support those things that Chris was just talking about. So as long as the service provider is not the one providing it. So if the iPhone or the Android phone has that capability in it, then CALEA doesn't apply to the manufacturer of the phone. To answer your question, how long? I think the answer is very difficult, but I'll give you a few data points. The IETF already has a working group called Utah, spelled UTA, that is working on specifications to use TLS underneath all of the applications protocols that were developed by the IETF. So in most cases, it's very straightforward to say, just run this protocol over TLS and get encryption between the communicating peers. It's a fairly straightforward thing to do. You might need a new port number, you might need a new command, you might need different things, but they're doing that work. I would expect that work will be done in the next year, and then it's a matter of what's the product development cycle for those to roll out. Things associated with new protocols are going to be harder and more difficult to predict. I think those things will mature as they do, and I think that we need to look to the development of those new protocols and saying, will the inclusion of encryption delay that capability getting out? And my hope is the answer to that is no, that they'll continue to be on their the timeline that they're on, and not be delayed by, say, we need to add encryption and so on. It's important to note that there are some cases where encryption is actually harmful. I know that's a difficult thing to say here, but it's also true. For example, in the send environment, which is secure neighbor discovery, that protocol, it turns out, actually, when we tried to integrate encryption into it, even though secure was part of its name, it turned out it meant it didn't work. So you couldn't find your neighbors. So the secure is about authentication, not about encryption. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all, but my hope that the IAB statement that says encryption should be the norm means that when a new protocol is developed, that people say, why are we not including encryption? And if they don't have a good answer, that they add it.
And I would also offer email as another space where it's a great research challenge of how to filter spam when you can't see what's going on. Before, or do you have something direct for that? Or do you have another?
Another question.
Okay, so just Quentin, I just wanted to ask you, from a sort of almost a commercial perspective, and a lot of your day job is convincing people to actually turn this on. Do you have any perspectives on, what could make this rollout go better?
I think a lot of it has to do with the articulation of the problem that it's trying to solve. And the most critical part is not convincing the technical community of it, but the business community. And ultimately, that's where, of a lot of initiatives, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Thanks, Nat.
Claude Barfield, AEI. I wonder if you could, you, Chris, but the rest of you also could talk a little bit more about the conflict between Apple, Google, FBI, and the others. You made the point that everything is going to the cloud except for the instant of telephones and instant messaging. Sorry about my technical lack of understanding here, but what is the relationship between the customer and, let's say, Apple and Google as to what goes into the cloud? Could someone say, I want this state to stay out of the cloud? And then beyond that, what about, you seem to think that there's no possibility that we'll get legislation. And I wonder with the new Republican Congress, which is going to be has already shown to be more sympathetic to the security side, whether or not you might have an attempt to legislate something. And that leads me to look abroad. If we see what's been said by the government of Britain and possibly other governments, they are very likely, the Parliament is likely to intervene on the legislative, with the legislative means. So we can't look at it just in the United States. There will be other countries who've looked at this, and I suppose technologically they will be informed of this thing the points that you just made about things are going to the cloud except for the instant. So they may not go that way, but they also may decide we don't want this company not to be able to give us some kind of key or some kind of entrance into the encrypted part.
Yes, so you raise a number of really interesting points there. I think for many companies, I think that the reason they're using cloud backups is not some kind of, conspiracy. I think it really boils down to automatic backups are really, really good. I wasn't in any way suggesting that. I'm just saying that the reason that these companies are turning on cloud backups by default is because if backups require action on the part of the user, most people, when their computers do fail, have months-old backups, not days-old or hours-old backups. And this has happened to me before, right? You spill water on a device, and suddenly you only have a 6-month-old version of a document, and that's no fun. And so we've seen from the old days of Microsoft Word crashing and losing your document to now Word having automatic saving, which helps to protect you against that. And now we're moving towards automatic cloud backups, so that even if the device has problems, you're saved. Because of the utility of this for consumers, I really do think that the trend is going to be towards more data being backed up in the cloud, not less. And again, without some kind of fundamental new innovation in computer security, I don't see an easy way to provide cloud backups that work for the regular person, that survive forgetting of passwords. And for most people, if you tell them, okay, you've lost your password and now you're losing every photo of your children that you ever took when they were growing up, that is a non-starter, right? And so for regular people, cloud backups that where the company can restore access when the user forgets the password, that's what people want. And so the question then for people like us, people who are interested in encryption and privacy and policy is, well, how do you make things more expensive for law enforcement? How do you protect people's privacy in a world where cloud backups are going to be the norm? And so certainly for people who are tech savvy, providing the ability to opt out of a cloud backup, I think, is a good thing, or providing people with the option to have cloud backups with keys that are only known to the user is a good thing. But I
What
think
is the situation now? If I am we're talking about a subset of people here, tech savvy, and also may have not the best of intentions. Could they now say to Google and Apple, we do not want this?
you can opt out of iCloud right now.
Okay, so that is, in other words, if you're the FBI, then you're going to want to get. It can't be. It's not just telephones. I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just saying I'm trying to find out what the FBI is concerned with, what the security guys are concerned with.
But so encryption software has been available for
I
20
understand.
years.
I know that.
Well, so on one hand, you have the FBI saying, oh my goodness, terrorists and drug dealers and the most sophisticated criminals. But really what they're worried about is someone walking into Walmart and buying a device and turning it on and never changing any of the defaults. What is freaking them out isn't the availability of new technology, it's the default settings, right? And so that is what is causing concern. It's not the highly sophisticated actor who spent hours and hours researching security and turned off various settings and downloaded additional third-party software. It's not the idiotic jihadist who downloads Mujahideen Secrets, which is the stupidest tool in the world. Why you would ever use an encryption tool that has in its metadata something that will get your traffic flagged by every intelligence agency in the world, I do not know. This is not about those people. This is about people who use the defaults, which are regular people, which then includes regular vanilla criminals. So to just briefly respond to your second part of the question, which is what's happening in the UK, because of an attack against a member of the military there in Woolwich, I think last year, the year before, the UK government is really going guns blazing against Facebook now, saying that Facebook and companies like Facebook have, in essence, a responsibility to police what their users are saying to each other and what their users are doing. And I think this marks a major turning point for these tech companies, many of who've built business models around collecting and mining user data. And this isn't my observation first. This is a really, really smart software developer named Mike Hearn who wrote about this weekend, but it's such a good point that it's worth repeating. The cost to the companies of storing the data and trafficking the data in unencrypted form is now higher than the advertising value or potential advertising value they would ever extract from that data. Facebook doesn't mine your private messages right now anyway. Google doesn't mine your text messages. The phone companies don't mine your text messages. But if governments are now going to hold these companies responsible for what their users are doing, I think we will start to see many big companies following in WhatsApp's footsteps and saying, you know what, we don't want to see this. We can deliver targeted ads based on the websites that you visit alone. We don't need to see what you're actually saying to people. We want to protect ourselves by using encryption. And so I think we're going to start to see the use of encryption not to protect the user from a hacker, but to protect the company from their customers, from the legal liability associated with their customers. What are they going to, if Silicon Valley companies roll this out, what are they going to do? Are they going to block all American tech companies and get people to start, just to use a British search engine that was built from scratch?
No, but the French one.
Any other comments before we move on? You actually just hit on the point, which comes back to the, shutting companies down is, if everyone doesn't do it or if everyone does make the net go dark, it's great. It's what about the companies that don't? What does this do for an interworked internet? Or do we end up with, the UK is 1984 and everything gets monitored because they do block?
You said one thing, and I'll make it very quick. When you mentioned, does the internet go dark? All you need, we haven't seen yet, some event will happen. I don't know what the event will be, but it'll be the reverse of the digital Pearl Harbor or the digital 9/11, where something happens and then it's an aha moment where everybody says, okay, that's it. It's following in the steps. We're going to follow in the steps of Apple and Google. We don't care what people say, because you know why? Because the netizens will have screens go dark, just like remember Sopa Pippa? That wasn't so long ago, and that was an astonishment to everybody.
David?
Hi.
Tell us who you are, David.
I'm David Viors with ISOC DC. I want to thank you guys. You guys did a great job of positing the risks to individual privacy in a trusted environment online posed by government eavesdropping or backdoors or whatever. But are there threats to my privacy online coming from the private sector? Should I be worried about what Facebook and Google and the third-party marketers that collect my data are doing with it as well?
Yes.
Is this threat only from government, or?
I mean, I work for a civil liberties group that sues the U.S. government. So you ask a fish what they're concerned about, and they'll tell you water.
That's your particular nail.
That's what I focus on, yeah.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I think that the focus of this panel was, as you said, on the returning to the crypto wars discussion. But anyone who's gathering all of this information about its customers and clients is then running analytics against them and so on. And one of the uses that we've seen of encryption is to prevent the changing of ads. Some middle boxes were stripping out the ad that the website was trying to provide and putting its own advertisement in. So one use you're seeing by these websites of encryption is to make sure that the ad that it wants you to see is the one you do see. So interesting that it's protecting the comms channel, but from who?
So just very quickly on that note, wasn't that an IETF standard technology they were using with edge services?
The encryption was being done,
Oh, sure.
the encryption that's preventing the ad stripping is an IETF technology.
So I wanted to, Alan Friedman, I'm a research scientist at the Cybersecurity Policy Research Institute here at George Washington. Wanted to take a broader look at some of the risks and maybe bring Quentin in here. We talked about the difference of CAs, and I know, Chris, you've done some work on this. Not all CAs may be equally trustworthy. If we're worried about a government threat actor breaking crypto, there's a very natural place for them to go if there's a hard technical solution. Is that something that we should be trying to solve at the same time, or would you like to see, from a policy perspective, these issues treated differently?
I can take a crack at that. So I think it's a great question. From my perspective, I think there's a combination of the two, policy as well as CAs taking more responsibility and making sure that they're raising the bar in terms of protecting the CA. So what I mean by that is, number one, going back to policy, each CA is going to have their own different policies. As an example, at Symantec, it's our policy not to share or provide root or intermediate keys with any entity, which includes government agencies. But again, not all CAs are created, to your point, and it's something that we need to be mindful of. So that's on the policy side. But on the technology side, again, one of the things I was trying to strike home in one of the slides I was showing is all CAs have an obligation not to improve security and trust on the internet as a whole, a sort of a higher level initiative, very pointedly to protect the CAs themselves from breach, from personnel inside the organization that can issue certificates when they shouldn't be. All those different elements are something that the CAs need to do. And on top of that, just operationally, again, under the lines of not all CAs are created equal, we may be able to get certificates very cheap, but it's or free. But I think the question everybody needs to ask is, what type of investment are those CAs making in their infrastructure to protect against a type of breach where it's the skeleton key to the entire kingdom?
So I have a very different view on the system. The current certificate authority infrastructure is rotten. It's rotten to the core, and it's broken in so many ways. But you don't have to just worry about the certificate authority that you pay, but you have to worry about every other certificate authority, including the ones that you don't pay. And I'm not the only person who's warning about this. Just a couple of years ago, the Director of National Intelligence testified before the U.S. Senate and flagged the certificate authority system as a weak point. This is after DigiNotar had been hacked by the Iranians. We just learned in the last few weeks an excerpt published from Kim Zetter's new book about Stuxnet that the authors of Flame of Duku, one of the targets they went after was a Hungarian certificate authority. We know that Stuxnet was delivered through stolen code signing certificates obtained from a Taiwanese company, not a CA, but a end user code signing certs. We know that governments, in their efforts to hack each other and to hack targets, are using either end user certificates or, in some cases, certificate authority certificates too. You know, and even if, I know there are people in this room who maybe, you know, don't share my views on everything, even if you believe that surveillance is the best thing in the world, I think many people can at least agree that probably US government computers shouldn't be trusting Chinese certificate authorities. Right? That you
And by
look at
default, they do.
and by default they do, because it's a race to the bottom, and the browser vendors don't really want to say no, particularly Microsoft, which is so scared of antitrust concerns that they will say yes to any CA that looks somewhat legit and has paid KPMG money for an audit. This is a serious thing. We should not be trusting foreign certificate authorities to sign .us and .gov sites, and by the same token, DoD shouldn't be allowed to sign .com certificates. We need to have, at the very least, constraints on top-level domains so that DHS should be allowed to issue any .gov certificate, but they shouldn't be allowed to issue .com or .ch or .eu certificates. But right now, everyone can issue certificates for every other country's top-level domain, and that's a major problem. And for any of you who have either yourself or a friend or spouse or loved one tried to use a CAT card, the US government ID cards, on a computer and then had to download a bunch of really sketchy certificates from volunteer-run websites, the US government employees shouldn't have to be downloading software from unencrypted websites to get their employee cards working. But that's also a result of this entire certificate authority mess.
So Steve, you might know something about encryption, about CAs, about top-level domains. Introduce yourself and fire away.
My name is Steve Crocker. I actually, I'm chairman of the board of directors of ICANN, but I have a question that is unrelated actually to that. First of all, enormous thanks to all of you, All-Star team, and you've hit, I tried very hard to be quiet because you guys are hitting all the right things. But I want to touch on one thing that I didn't hear about. Several years ago, there was a court decision that 2 carriers was sufficient to be sufficient for competition. And my reaction, along with many others, was this is not a great day for network neutrality. And one of the counters to ISPs deciding which traffic they're going to give preference to is to try to make the traffic look more the same. Encryption is a tool for that. So aside from protecting end-to-end and aside from protecting against government surveillance, what do you have to say about the interaction of encryption and ISPs and carriers in the network neutrality business?
Can I start by giving people a link? If you, again, go to the university seminars, GW University Seminars, let's see, IFG, Internet Freedom and Governance, that's what you want to look for. If you look up Internet Freedom and Governance, GW University Seminars, or go to the CSPRI website, Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute website, there's a link somehow there to the university seminars. Just less than a month ago, we had maybe it's about a month ago, we had a whole long discussion on net neutrality, and it's all videotaped or video recorded and there for your viewing pleasure with some of the best legal experts from around the world.
Does it speak to the interaction between encryption and network neutrality?
To my recollection, it does not, which is very interesting. There's a couple interesting voids here. One is that. The question, if there's no mics in the room, does it speak to encryption and the interaction with net neutrality? The answer is, to my recollection, no. The second thing is, somebody mentioned it earlier, there is no law enforcement or intelligence community person on this panel. I suspect that is not for lack of trying. Eric might know more than I do about that, but that says something also, and I think you pointed out. we can't be, I'm a university professor. I don't consider myself really, in some sense, on one side or the other. But I do know there's lots of sides or several sides to talk here, and at least a couple of them aren't represented.
Yeah, I would offer, just to make clear that I personally don't think that they backed out for nefarious reasons. I think it was just an unfortunate thing, but that doesn't change the fact that no one's here.
Well, I think there were efforts before, there were lots of other try Speaker A, Speaker B, Speaker C, and there were a lot of tries.
It's much easier to get a pro-backdoor speaker who has a legal background than it is to find a pro-backdoor speaker who has a technical background. And I think that the reasons for that sort of speak for themselves. And so there have been countless events in Washington where you have, a civil liberties lawyer versus a current or former national security lawyer. So there have been events with the ex-FBI general counsel just in New York and in DC in the last few weeks. But it's really, really difficult to find someone technical and pro-surveillance. And particularly on this issue where there are there are a lot of technical people all on one side saying that weakening security to enable surveillance is a really, really bad idea.
So one thing I'd like to say in response to Steve is it depends what layer you do it at, whether it matters at all. If the port number is plain text and the payload is encrypted, you can still make prioritization decisions based on what protocol is being used, and so encryption may or may not help in this net neutrality debate at all. You have to be pretty far down the stack in order to hide all the information that you might make a prioritization decision on, and then your router may have to decrypt that part in order to make a routing decision, and then the performance could then be impacted if you're doing hop-by-hop encryption between every router.
So Micah gets the last, you do get the last one. This is chairman's prerogative or whatever. Do you two know, have I introduced the two of you? I need to Steve. Well, if you don't, so since he gave you a softball there, I'll let you hit that out of the park, and then you can ask the question about hiding traffic and things. You might know something about that?
I do.
And since Lance gets to do his URL, you can talk.
The Tor project is a good resource for people who want to hide metadata. And something that hasn't come up today is encryption is great at hiding content.
Micah, who are you?
Oh, sorry. I'm Micah Schur. I'm a professor at Georgetown University. Encryption is great at hiding content, but doesn't do anything about hiding metadata. And the internet isn't designed to hide metadata. So we need something like Tor, which is an overlay network, which works on top of the internet to actually conceal who we're actually communicating with. And if you look at wiretap reports given by the government, most of the, at least in the law enforcement realm, most of the wiretaps that occur isn't with real-time content, it's to actually look at metadata, which is surprisingly revealing. So my question is, to me it seems like moving towards encrypting everything, encrypt by default, things that you've spearheaded like Star TLS between major providers for encrypted email, move us a lot closer towards a trusted internet, which is the theme of today's session. But I'm wondering, apart from encryption, authenticity is obviously kind of the other side of that. And something that hasn't been mentioned is transparency. We've talked about the CA models and problems that we know exist with it, and problems with code signing that Chris mentioned. But I'm wondering if you have comments on projects like certificate transparency and other systems that allow users to determine whether the content that they're getting is in fact the same content that someone else is getting who's requesting the same URL or code update.
It's a great question. Let me take that one. So I think in general, what I've heard today was very compelling. I got a sense of the idealism of what should be from different perspectives. And I think we've all heard sort of the challenges from a policy perspective, technology perspective, but from a very selfish perspective, as a talking in the CA space, the CA space is not broken, and definitely, if with any environment there's space, there's room for improvement. And I think the good news is, industry's job, and we take this seriously, is trying to make this, whatever it is, trying to make it better. Now, when we talk about whether CAs are broken, which is fundamentally not the case, one of the things that we all need to remember is for an ecosystem to be truly trustworthy, there needs to be several elements attached to it. There needs to be the underlying crypto. There needs to be identity, strong identity attached to it. There needs to be scalability. And there needs to be a sense of determinism, meaning all the schemes that we've taken a look at where you have to go in and trust on first use, it was a non-starter for us to make sure we have a secure ecosystem. Now, coming back to your point in terms of, well, if you take from a historical perspective, CAs that have gotten hacked, Digital Tar was brought up, Komodo was another one back in 2011 through an RA. All those elements were great learning lessons for the entire industry. And one of the concerns that was born out of those incidents was, well, what if a CA does issue a google.com cert, let's say, when they shouldn't have been? So Google has spearheaded an ecosystem called certificate transparency, which all the CAs are now adopting for the right reasons, and it's a good thing, where any CA has to publish the certificates that CA is issuing, full stop. And it's going to start with EV certificates, but the guidance is that we'll roll it out to OV and DV certificates as well. The value of having a repository, an open repository like that, is now we can have independent third parties, whether they're public sector, private sector, whatever it may be, full access in terms of auditability and seeing what CA is issued. And in that sense, it's a very powerful tool to make sure that at least we can catch and monitor when bad things happen across CAs. And again, not striking and belaboring the point, not all CAs are created the same.
So I'll just add that the most interesting thing that's come out in the last couple of years that strengthens the certificate authority model is certificate pinning, which was pioneered by Google engineer Adam Langley. They added it to Chrome. Firefox has since added it. It's because of this feature which allows a website or website master to tell the browsers, okay, in the future, only use HTTPS, and you can even say, and only accept this certificate authority and no other. And it's because of that feature that was hard-coded into Chrome that the DigiNotar hack was discovered in the first place. And so once your organization is using HTTPS by default, the next step is to email Google's security team and ask them to add your site to the Chrome the Chrome list, so that users never even try and go to HTTP. They go straight to the encrypted connection. In terms of the transparency thing, the other thing I'll say is that one of the most interesting developments on that front is something called deterministic builds. This is something that came out of the Bitcoin world, and the idea is, as a user using software that may be open source, how do you know that the app that you're running was built from the source code that's available online? How do you know that the app that you're running is the same app that someone else is running? And so the Bitcoin community, which is obviously very concerned with shenanigans, has really pioneered this model, and it's been adopted by Tor and several other open source projects. And hopefully down the road we're going to get to a point where maybe the Tor browser will ask other Tor nodes and say, hey, are you running this version of the Tor browser too? Because maybe you don't want to get a malicious update. There are avenues of exciting research to allow people to compare notes with others and make sure that they didn't get a special update that no one else got.
And just maybe one last thing in addition to that, a lot of good things floating around in the ecosystem. What we haven't talked about or had time to talk about are things like certification authority, authorization. It's an element where enterprises or any entity can put in their DNS records basically saying, all right, just to make sure, we only allow these CAs to issue certificates for our domains. So those are the kind of things that are happening in the ecosystem, and that's what we're excited about.
Okay, so in the begging forgiveness realm, I wasn't sure whether we were going till 6 or 6:30, and I did notice a few people left at 6. That's fine, because that is actually our advertised end time. But since I'm in the begging forgiveness mode, I'm going to make you squirm a little more. Do people want to just have like a 1-minute follow-up, or you went, nope, Lance?
Yes,
Lance, Lance, why don't you speak for all of us and give us a 1-minute thing, and then we still have the room, we still have cookies. Thank you, Steve. And we can all, continue the conversation. So please, Lance.
It'll be less than 1 minute. One thing I noticed in some of the comments here, have you noticed how, especially when Chris's comment about, well, we don't want the U.S. Government people getting their stuff with the CA from China or something like that, or he didn't say that, but something sort of like that, implying, is this a good idea? There's an underlying system here of countries in the world, and 200 and some countries, okay? And some of these discussions and decisions are made on what the countries are and what they do, and they have different systems, okay? There's tension here because there's a tension here with globalization. It's like the walled garden argument, all over again. Where that's going to go, I don't know, but I think, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody offline, but I'll stop there. I think that needs more attention, because who is the deciding actor, or are there many deciding actors? And if there are, how does that complicate things? I don't know the answer.
Okay, with that, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you all for being here. Again, if you're interested in the Internet Society DC chapter, please see our representatives there, and see you at the next talk.